Daniel Carter dropped his mop and ran, because the woman on the 50th floor had just hit the ground, and no one else in that entire glass tower knew she was even there. He wasn't supposed to be on that floor. He wasn't supposed to open that door, and he sure as anything wasn't supposed to see what he saw. But the second Victoria Hale's body folded against her own desk, everything Daniel thought he knew about the powerful, the untouchable, and the people who looked down on men like him changed forever. Stay with me until the very end, because what he does next will surprise you. And drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. If you love a story about real people, hit subscribe and follow the channel. Part 1. Daniel Carter counted money he didn't have. He did it every night, standing in the freight elevator, with his forehead pressed against the cold steel wall, riding up through 50 floors of a building that would never belong to him. Rent was 11 days late. Lily's inhaler had 4 doses left. The pharmacy had stopped saying, "We'll work with you," and started saying, "We'll need payment up front." And the overtime he'd begged for, the overtime that was supposed to fix all of it, had turned into this. The top floors, the restricted floors, the floors where the cleaning crew wasn't allowed to bring anybody who talked. "You don't touch anything," his supervisor Marcus had told him in the locker room an hour earlier. "You don't read anything. You don't sit in a chair that costs more than your car. You clean, you leave, you keep your mouth shut. These people up here, Danny, they can end you with a phone call. You understand what I'm telling you?" "I understand." "No, look at me. You got a kid. You need this job more than the job needs you. So you make yourself invisible up there." "Marcus, I've been invisible my whole life," Daniel had said. "I'm real good at it." He hadn't meant it as a joke, and Marcus hadn't laughed. Now the elevator doors opened onto the 50th floor, and Daniel stepped out into a silence so complete it felt like the building was holding its breath. He pushed his cart down the corridor. The wheels squeaked. It was the only sound in the world. He thought about Lily back in the apartment with Mrs. Alvarez from down the hall, who watched her 3 nights a week for $40 and a promise Daniel wasn't always sure he could keep. He thought about the way Lily coughed in her sleep, that dry, tearing sound that woke him even through the wall. He thought about the specialist at Mount Sinai who'd said the words pediatric pulmonologist and ongoing management and out-of-pocket in the same breath, and how Daniel had nodded like he understood, like a man who had options. He didn't have options. He had a mop and a night shift, and a daughter who deserved a father who could give her more. "One floor," he murmured to himself. "One floor at a time." He worked his way down the corridor, emptying bins, wiping glass, moving like a ghost through offices that held more wealth in a single drawer than he'd see in a lifetime. He didn't look at the photographs on the desks. He didn't read the papers. He kept his eyes down and his hands moving the way you learn to when the world has taught you that being noticed is dangerous. And then he reached the end of the hall. There was a door there heavier than the others, dark wood instead of glass. A brass nameplate caught the low light. Victoria Hale, Chief Executive Officer. Daniel stopped. Marcus's voice came back to him. "These people can end you with a phone call." He knew who Victoria Hale was. Everybody who worked in that building knew. She was the reason the night crew whispered. She'd taken over Hale and Cross after her father died, and within 2 years, she'd cut a third of the workforce, crushed 2 competitors, and turned a struggling holding company into something the business channels talked about with a kind of fear dressed up as admiration. They called her the Ice Queen in the break room. They called her worse when they were sure no one from management was around. The office was supposed to be locked after hours. It was on his list marked, "Do not enter authorized only." But the door was open, just a few inches, and a light was on inside. Daniel's first instinct was to back away, to pretend he hadn't seen it, to finish the floor and go home and never think about that door again. But then he heard it, a sound, low, sharp, the kind of sound a person makes when they think they're alone and the pain gets too big to hold quiet. "Hello?" Daniel said, and his own voice startled him. "Is somebody... Are you okay in there?" No answer. Just that sound again, quicker this time, and something falling, something metal hitting the floor. Every rule he'd been given told him to walk away. He pushed the door open instead. And Victoria Hale, the most feared woman in that building. The woman who ended people with phone calls was on the floor of her own office, one hand gripping the edge of her desk, the other pressed against her side, and she was not powerful. She was not untouchable. Her jacket was off her blouse, pulled loose at the shoulder, and Daniel saw what he was never ever supposed to see, a medical brace half unstrapped wrapped around a torso, mapped with the pale raised evidence of surgeries. Scars that ran long and deliberate, a body that had been broken and rebuilt, and was in that moment failing her. Her face when she looked up at him was white with pain, and something worse than pain. It was terror. For one full second, neither of them moved. Then her voice came out, and even flat on the floor, even shaking it cut like a blade. "Get out!" Daniel didn't move. "I said get out." "You're hurt," he said. "I don't care what you think you saw. Get out of my office." But Daniel had spent 36 years watching his mother work double shifts while she was sick, watching her wave people off with that exact same voice, that "I'm fine, don't you dare pity me" voice, and he knew what it was covering. He set down the edge of his cart and crouched, slow hands visible the way you'd approach a frightened animal. "Ma'am, I'm not going to touch you if you don't want me to," he said quietly. "But you dropped that." He nodded toward the metal strap on the floor, the buckle of the brace. "And you can't get up on your own right now. I can see that." "You can't see anything." Her jaw was tight. Sweat beaded at her hairline. "You're a janitor." "Yes, ma'am, I am." He didn't flinch. "And I've got a 7-year-old at home with lungs that don't work right, and I've spent about 1,000 nights on a bathroom floor holding her while she fought to breathe. So I know exactly what it looks like when somebody's in trouble and too proud to say it." He held out one hand, not touching, just offering. "Let me help you into the chair, then I'll leave. You'll never see me again." Something flickered across her face. She looked at his hand like it was a trick, like everything in her life had taught her that an offered hand was the setup for a knife. "If you tell anyone about this," she said, and her voice dropped so low he had to lean in, "I will destroy you. Do you understand me? I will make sure you never work in this city again. I will find your daughter's doctor and make sure—" "You don't have to threaten me." Daniel's voice didn't rise, but something in it went hard as the steel wall of that elevator. "I'm not going to say anything. Not because you scared me, because it's nobody's business but yours." He held her eyes. "Now do you want the chair or not? Because I can crouch here all night, but you're the one on the floor." For a long moment she stared at him. Then slowly she reached up and took his hand. He didn't grab her. He let her set the pace, let her use his arm as a fixed point while she pulled herself up inch by inch, breath hissing between her teeth. When she wobbled, he braced his shoulder under her without being asked, and she stiffened at the contact but didn't pull away. She couldn't. He eased her into the chair behind the desk. She landed in it like something dropped, and for a moment she just sat there, eyes closed. Both hands flat on the armrests, breathing the careful, measured breaths of a person managing pain, the way other people manage a budget. Daniel stepped back. He picked the buckle up off the floor and set it on the desk within her reach, then moved away again, giving her room. "Water," he said. "You got water up here." "Mini fridge, under the credenza." He got it. Cracked the seal so she wouldn't have to. Set it beside her hand, then retreated to the doorway. She drank. Her hand was shaking less now. When she finally opened her eyes, she looked at him differently. Not softer. Victoria Hale did not do softer. But sharper, like she was recalculating him, filing him into a category that hadn't existed 30 seconds ago. "What's your name?" she said. It wasn't quite a question. "Daniel Carter." "How long have you worked in this building?" "Daniel Carter." 2 years, ma'am. And in 2 years you never made it up to this floor. They don't send us up here. Tonight was overtime. My supervisor practically read me my rights before I got in the elevator." He shifted his weight. Look, you're upright, you've got water, and I've said what I've got to say. I'll finish the rest of the floor tomorrow. I'll tell them the office was locked. Nobody has to know I was ever here." He turned to go. "Carter." He stopped. "Why didn't you run?" she asked. "When you saw." "Most people." She stopped, and he understood that she was speaking from experience, that she knew exactly how most people reacted to weakness, because she had built her whole life around never showing them any. Most people would have backed out that door so fast they'd have left skid marks. "You came in." "Why?" Daniel thought about it. He didn't give her a clean answer because he didn't have one. "Because you made a sound like my daughter makes," he said finally. "The one that means you're trying not to scare anybody. I can't walk away from that sound. I don't know how." Victoria Hale said nothing. She just looked at him, and for the first time the terror in her eyes had fully drained away, leaving something Daniel couldn't name. "Go home, Mr. Carter," she said. "It's late." He went. He didn't sleep that night. He got home a little after 4 in the morning, paid Mrs. Alvarez the $40 he'd been saving for gas, and stood in the doorway of Lily's tiny room, watching the small rise and fall of her chest under the blanket. She'd kicked half of it off. She always did. He tucked it back over her shoulder, and she stirred, mumbled something, and slid back under without waking. "Hey, baby," he whispered. "Daddy's home." He sat on the edge of her bed for a long time. He kept seeing it. Not the scars, though he saw those too, would probably see them for the rest of his life. What he kept seeing was the terror. The naked animal fear on the face of a woman who had, by every account, spent her whole life making other people afraid. She'd threatened him. She'd threatened Lily. And he understood in a way he couldn't have explained to anybody that she hadn't done it because she was cruel. She'd done it because she was cornered, because he'd seen the one thing she could not afford for the world to see. "That's a lonely way to live," he said softly to no one to the dark. "That's about the loneliest way I ever heard of." He thought that was the end of it. He really did. He figured he'd go back to work the next night, clean the floors he was allowed to clean, and Victoria Hale would go back to being a name he only heard in the break room. Two people who'd brushed against each other once in the dark and would never speak again. He was wrong. The call came at 2 p.m. the next day. Daniel was asleep. He always slept days on the night shift, and the phone buzzing on the nightstand pulled him up out of a dream he immediately forgot. He didn't recognize the number. "Hello. Mr. Carter." A woman's voice. Crisp. Professional. Not the voice from the office, younger and assistant's voice. "Please hold for Ms. Hale." Daniel sat up so fast his head spun. "Please hold for Ms. Hale." Every warning Marcus had ever given him lined up in his skull like dominoes. "She'll end you with a phone call." He thought about Lily. He thought about the 11 days of late rent. He thought with a cold drop in his stomach that he had been a fool to think a woman like that would just let it go. There was a click. "Mr. Carter?" Her voice. Steady now, controlled no trace of last night's fracture. "I need you to come to the building. Now. Not tonight. Now." Ma'am, my shift doesn't start till..." "I'm aware of your shift. This has nothing to do with your shift. Come to the 50th floor. Tell the front desk you're expected. They'll let you up." A pause. "And Mr. Carter come alone." The line went dead. Daniel sat on the edge of his bed holding the silent phone, his heart going like a drum. He almost didn't go. He stood in the kitchen for 10 full minutes, staring at nothing running through it. "She's going to fire you. Or worse. She's going to make good on the threat. Or she wants to look you in the eye and make sure you're properly scared before she does whatever she's going to do." Every instinct he had, every hard lesson poverty had ever taught him about the powerful, told him that nothing good waited for him on the 50th floor. But then he thought about the water bottle. The way her hand had steadied around it. The way she'd asked, "Why didn't you run?" like the answer actually mattered to her. And he thought, a coward doesn't get to raise a brave kid. He put on his one good shirt. He kissed Lily's forehead, told Mrs. Alvarez he'd be back by 5, and he went. The front desk was expecting him exactly like she'd said. A security guard he'd never spoken to walked him to a private elevator. Not the freight elevator. The real one, mirrored and silent and smelling of money, and pressed 50 with a key card, and rode up with him without a word. The doors opened onto the corridor Daniel had cleaned 100 times, but never in daylight. It looked different with the sun pouring through the glass, less like a place he snuck through, and more like a place that belonged to someone. The heavy wooden door at the end was open, this time on purpose. "Mr. Carter?" Victoria Hale sat behind her desk, upright, immaculate, a woman fully assembled. There was no sign of the person he'd found on the floor 12 hours earlier, except that Daniel could see it now if he knew where to look. The careful way she held her spine, the stillness of her left arm, the pallor under the makeup. "Sit down." He sat. She studied him for a long moment. On the desk between them was a folder closed. "I know a great deal about you, Mr. Carter," she said. "As of this morning, I know more about you than most people who've known you for years." She opened the folder. "Daniel James Carter, 36. Widower, your wife passed 4 years ago. Ovarian cancer. You've been raising your daughter alone since she was 3. She didn't look up. 11 days behind on rent. Approximately $19,000 in medical debt. Your daughter Lily has severe persistent asthma with a secondary complication her current clinic isn't equipped to manage, and the specialist who can manage it doesn't take your insurance, which is why you took the overtime that put you on my floor last night." Daniel's mouth had gone dry. "You had somebody dig all that up in one morning?" "I had somebody dig all that up in 2 hours." She closed the folder. "I don't like surprises, Mr. Carter. Last night was the first genuine surprise I've had in a very long time. So I removed it the only way I know how. I made it something I understand." She folded her hands. "Now let me tell you what I want." "Ma'am, let me finish." Her eyes were steel. 11 years ago I was in a car accident. Not the fender bender my press office tells people about. The kind that puts you in a hospital for 9 months and leaves you with a spine held together by hardware and a body that on its worst days does exactly what you saw it do last night. I manage it. I have managed it alone for over a decade because in my world, the moment they smell weakness, they circle. There are men on my own board who have spent years waiting for a reason to say, "I'm not fit to run this company." If any one of them ever saw what you saw last night, I would lose everything my father built and everything I bled to keep. She let that sit. You saw it. And instead of selling it, you got me a bottle of water and left. "I don't want anything from you," Daniel said. "I told you that. I know you don't. That's exactly why I'm offering." She leaned forward, and for the first time, something almost human crossed her face. Not warmth, but a strange, sharp respect. "I don't trust people, Mr. Carter. I have never in my adult life had a single person around me whose loyalty I didn't buy or manufacture. Last night, for the first time, I watched a total stranger hold something that could destroy me and choose for no reason that benefited him not to use it." She paused. "That is worth more to me than you can possibly understand. So what are you asking me to do? Work for me, directly, privately?" She slid a single sheet of paper across the desk. "Officially, you'll be listed as executive support staff. Unofficially, you'll be the only person alive who knows about my condition, and you'll help me manage it. Get me where I need to be on the bad days. Handle it when my body fails in front of people it can't fail in front of. Be the reason no one ever sees what you saw." She tapped the page. "In exchange, a salary that will make you forget the number 19,000 ever existed. Full medical coverage, the real kind, the kind that gets your daughter in front of the pulmonologist at Mount Sinai by the end of this week, not the end of this year. And a life, Mr. Carter, where you stop counting doses." Daniel looked at the paper. He didn't touch it. The number was there near the top. He read it once, then read it again, because the first time his brain refused to believe it. "There's a catch," he said quietly. "There's always a catch. The catch is discretion, absolute. You never speak of my condition to anyone, not a coworker, not a doctor, not your daughter, not a priest. Not now, Not in 10 years, not after I'm gone. The catch is that you belong to my confidence and no one else's." Her voice hardened. "And if you ever break that, you'll destroy me." "Yeah, you mentioned." Daniel finally looked up from the paper and met her eyes. "You keep threatening me, ma'am. You keep leading with the threat, and I've got to be honest with you, that's how I know you don't understand me yet." For a moment, Victoria Hale looked genuinely thrown. "Excuse me, you think I'd keep your secret because I'm scared of what you'd do to me?" He shook his head slowly. "I'd keep it because it's yours. Because I saw a person on a floor last night who was hurting and alone and too proud to ask for help, and there is nothing on this earth that would make me hand that person over to a room full of wolves." He pushed the paper an inch back toward her. "I don't need the threat. That's the part you can't buy and don't understand. I'll keep your secret for free. The salary and the doctor, that's you being fair to me for my time. But my silence?" He tapped his own chest. "That's just who I am. You didn't have to pay for it. You never did." The office was very quiet. Victoria Hale looked at him for a long, long moment. And something in her face, the armor, the calculation, the steel she'd been forged into, cracked just slightly, just at the corner of her eyes. "You know?" she said, and her voice was different now, lower, almost wondering. "In 15 years of running this company, I don't think a single person has ever said something like that to me and meant it." "Then you've been in the wrong rooms," Daniel said. For the first time, Victoria Hale almost smiled. She slid a pen across the desk. "Sign it," she said. "Not because I'm making you, because your daughter has an appointment I'd like to move to Thursday." Daniel Carter looked at the pen. He thought about Lily's 4 remaining doses. He thought about the bathroom floor all those nights. He thought about his wife gone 4 years and what she'd tell him to do. He picked up the pen. And he signed. The pen was still warm in his hand when Victoria Hale slid a phone across the desk toward him. "That's yours now," she said. "New number. Only 3 people have it. Me, my assistant Grace, and my physician, Dr. Reyes. When it rings, you answer it. It doesn't matter if it's 3 in the afternoon or 3 in the morning. It doesn't matter if you're asleep or eating dinner or watching your daughter's school play. You answer it. Is that understood?" Daniel looked at the phone. It was newer and finer than anything he'd ever owned. "And what if it rings during Lily's school play, and I'm the only parent she's got in that whole auditorium?" Victoria's jaw tightened. "Then you'll learn to step into the hallway quietly. No." He set the phone back down on the desk, not hard but firm enough that she heard it. "Let's get one thing straight before I walk out of this office, ma'am. I'll answer that phone. I'll come running any hour of the day. But my daughter comes first, not sometimes, always. If you can't live with that, then I'll hand you back this pen right now and we'll pretend last night never happened." For a moment, the office was so silent he could hear the faint hum of the building's ventilation. He watched her weigh it. He watched a woman who had spent 15 years making people bend try to figure out what to do with a man who wouldn't. "Grace has 3 children, Victoria finally said. "In 7 years she's never once put me ahead of a fever or a broken arm, and I've never fired her for it. I respect people who have lines, Mr. Carter. I only despise the ones who pretend they don't and fold the moment I push." She pushed the phone back toward him. "Take it. Your daughter comes first. But everything after your daughter comes to me before it comes to anyone else. That's the deal." He took the phone. "Good," she said. "Now go home. Grace will call you tonight with the appointment details for Lily. Thursday, 9 a.m. Dr. Priya Anand at Mount Sinai. She's the best pediatric pulmonologist on the East Coast, and until this morning, her wait list was 14 months long." Daniel stopped halfway out of the chair. "You already made the appointment." "I made it at 10 this morning," Victoria said, not looking up from her folder. "Before you'd even agreed, before you'd woken up." She finally raised her eyes to his. "I told you, I don't like surprises. I decided last night that you were going to say yes. I'm rarely wrong about people. And if I'd said no, Then I'd have paid for the appointment anyway and never told you." She said it flatly, like it cost her nothing. And that was somehow the thing that hit Daniel hardest of all. "Your daughter's lungs aren't a bargaining chip, Mr. Carter. I don't hold children hostage. Whatever you've heard about me in that break room downstairs, I don't do that." He stood there in the doorway a moment longer, not sure what to say to a woman who threatened to destroy his career in one breath and quietly saved his daughter's life in the next. "Thank you," he said finally. It came out rough. "Don't thank me yet," Victoria said. "You have no idea what you just signed up for." She had no idea how right she was. Thursday morning came, and Daniel sat in a waiting room that didn't look like any clinic he'd ever been in. There was carpet. There was art on the walls that somebody had chosen on purpose. There was a fish tank, and Lily pressed her whole face against the glass and named every fish. And for the first time in longer than Daniel could remember, she wasn't struggling to breathe while she did it. Dr. Anand spent an hour with them, a full hour. She listened to Lily's chest, and she asked Lily questions directly, instead of talking over her head to Daniel. And when Lily said her chest felt like a balloon getting too full, Dr. Anand nodded, like that was the most useful thing anyone had told her all week. "Your current inhaler isn't wrong," she told Daniel afterward, once Lily was distracted by the fish again. "It's just not enough. She should have been on a controller medication 2 years ago, plus a proper action plan, plus a home nebulizer for the bad nights. Nobody's given you any of that." "Nobody could afford to give us any of that," Daniel said quietly. Dr. Anand looked at him with a kindness that almost undid him right there in the exam room. "Well, you can afford it now. And Mr. Carter, I want to be honest with you because I think you've been lied to a lot by people in coats. With the right management, Lily can live an almost entirely normal life. Sports, sleepovers, running around like a maniac. She doesn't have to spend her childhood being careful. We can give her the childhood back." Daniel had to turn away and pretend to look at the fish tank so the doctor wouldn't see his face come apart. That night, driving home with a bag full of medications that would have cost him 3 months' pay a week ago, Lily fell asleep in the back seat before they'd even crossed the bridge. Daniel kept glancing at her in the rearview mirror. He kept waiting to wake up. His new phone buzzed in the cup holder. He answered it on the second ring. "How did it go?" Victoria said. "No hello. She never said hello. She said Lily can have a normal life." Daniel's voice cracked, and he didn't try to hide it. "She said we can give her childhood back. Do you know what that—" He stopped, breathed. "You did that. In 2 hours. On a Tuesday morning. Something I couldn't do in 4 years." There was a silence on the line. When Victoria spoke again, her voice was strange, almost careful. "You're crying." "Yeah, I am." "Why?" "Because I'm happy, Victoria. Because for 4 years I've been terrified, and tonight I'm not." He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand at a red light. "You don't cry when you're happy." Another silence, longer this time. "No," she said finally. "I don't remember the last time I did." And she hung up before he could answer. Daniel drove the rest of the way home, thinking that was the loneliest sentence he'd ever heard a person say. The first 3 weeks were a lesson in a world Daniel had only ever cleaned the floors of. He learned that Victoria Hale's calendar was carved into 15-minute blocks from 6 in the morning until 9 at night. He learned that she took every meeting standing when she could, because sitting and rising was where her body betrayed her most, and standing let her control the room besides. He learned that Grace, the assistant with 3 kids, ran the entire visible half of Victoria's life, and had no idea about the other half. And he learned that the bad days Victoria had mentioned so casually were not occasional. They were constant. She just never let anybody see. He learned her tells. The way her left hand would find the edge of a desk or a chair back and grip it casual, like she was just leaning, when really she was holding herself up. The way she'd send Grace to get coffee, she didn't want timing it, so the woman was out of the room during the 90 seconds it took a spasm to pass. The way she'd schedule a private call right after a long board meeting, so she'd have an excuse to be alone when her body finally cashed the check her willpower had been writing all afternoon. Daniel's job, he came to understand, was to be the one person in the building who saw all of it and made sure no one else did. "You favored your right side coming out of the elevator this morning," he told her one evening, standing in the doorway of her office while she signed a stack of documents. "You had a bad night." Victoria didn't look up. "I had a fine night." "Victoria, don't." Her pen stopped. "I don't need a nurse, Mr. Carter. I have a physician for that. I need a shield. There's a difference." "A shield that doesn't know when you're bleeding is a pretty useless shield," Daniel said mildly. That got her. She set the pen down and looked at him, and there was that flash of irritation she got whenever he refused to be intimidated, the irritation that Daniel was starting to understand was actually something closer to bewilderment. "You're very sure of yourself for a man who was mopping this floor a month ago," she said. "And you're very good at insulting people who are trying to help you," Daniel said. "That's not a coincidence, is it? You do it on purpose. You throw the 'you were a janitor' thing at me every time I get too close to something real. It's a wall. I've figured out that much about you already." Victoria stared at him. For a second, Daniel thought he'd pushed too far. He'd been walking a line for 3 weeks, and he knew it feeling out how much honesty this woman could stand, and he'd just tripped over the edge of it. He waited for the cold voice to get out the reminder of who signed his checks. Instead, she said very quietly, "Yes, I do it on purpose." The admission seemed to surprise her more than it surprised him. "I've had a bad 3 nights, she went on, and her voice was flat and even, the voice of someone reciting facts about a stranger. "The hardware in my spine doesn't like the cold, and it's been cold. I've slept maybe 6 hours since Sunday. Tomorrow, I have a full board meeting where I have to stand for 2 hours and look like the most capable person in the room because there are 4 men on that board who would sell my company out from under me the second they thought I was too broken to stop them." She met his eyes. "So yes, Mr. Carter, I had a bad night. Are you satisfied?" "No," Daniel said. "But I appreciate you telling me the truth." He stepped fully into the office. "Now let me do the job you hired me for. What time's the board meeting?" 10. "Then here's what we're going to do." And Daniel started to talk, laying out a plan quick and practical, the way he'd once laid out plans for stretching $30 across a week of groceries. He'd get there at 8:30. He'd have the room warm before she walked in, no cold. He'd position himself in the hallway outside where she could see him through the glass, so if her body started to go, she'd have one place in that room she could look and know somebody had her. He'd arrange for a document delivery at the 90-minute mark, a built-in reason for a 5-minute break, so she wouldn't have to stand the full 2 hours in one shot. Victoria listened to all of it without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "You've thought about this a great deal," she said. "I think about how to protect people who won't protect themselves," Daniel said. "It's kind of my whole life." The next morning, the board meeting went perfectly. Victoria stood for 2 hours minus 1 strategically timed break, and she crushed a motion that 2 of the wolves had spent a month building, and she never once let them see her grip the edge of the podium. But Daniel saw it. He stood in the hallway the whole time, visible through the glass wall, and twice at the hardest moments, he watched her eyes flick to him. Just for half a second. Just long enough to find him. And then she'd look back at the wolves and bury them. Afterward, when the room had cleared, she came out into the hallway and stopped in front of him. She didn't thank him. She didn't say the plan had worked. She just looked at him for a moment, and then she said, "The delivery at 90 minutes. That was clever." "I've got 100 more where that came from," Daniel said, and Victoria Hale did something Daniel had never seen her do in 3 weeks of watching her every move. In an empty hallway with no one there to perform for, and no one there to fool, the corner of her mouth turned up, and it reached her eyes, and for just a second, she looked less like an ice queen, and more like a woman who'd just won something she'd been afraid to hope for. Then Grace came around the corner with her tablet, and the mask snapped back into place so fast, Daniel almost doubted he'd seen it, and Victoria Hale was untouchable again. But he'd seen it. He held on to that. The days built into weeks, and the weeks built a rhythm. Daniel would drop Lily at the school. He could now afford a good one small classes, a nurse on staff who knew her action plan by heart. And he'd go to the tower, and he'd spend his day being the one steady thing in the life of a woman who trusted no one. Lily got stronger. Her cough faded. The nebulizer sat unused for a week, then two. And one night, Daniel realized he hadn't heard that dry tearing sound through the wall in 11 days, and he sat on the edge of his bed and put his face in his hands and just breathed. He should have known it couldn't stay that simple. The first crack came on a Tuesday. Daniel was in the executive kitchen refilling Victoria's water when a man he didn't recognize walked in. Silver hair, expensive suit, the kind of easy confidence that came from never once in his life being told no. He looked Daniel up and down, the way a man looks at furniture. "You're the new one," the man said. "The support staff." Daniel Carter. He put out his hand. The man didn't take it. "Roland Cross. My family's name is on the building, half of it anyway. Been on this board since before Victoria's father died." He leaned against the counter, casual, blocking the door. "Funny thing, Mr. Carter. I've been on this board 11 years. I know every person Victoria keeps close, all two of them. And suddenly there's a third. A man who came up from the cleaning crew, no business experience, no assistant background, nothing. And she gives him a private phone and a salary that doesn't appear on any org chart I can find." He smiled, and there was no warmth in it. "I find that interesting. Don't you find that interesting?" Daniel kept his face still. Inside, an alarm was ringing. "I do executive support, Mr. Cross. Logistics. Nothing interesting about it." Roland Cross pushed off the counter. "Here's the thing about Victoria, Mr. Carter. She doesn't trust people. She never has, not since the accident. And a woman who doesn't trust anybody who suddenly trusts somebody, that tells me the somebody has something on her. Or she has something to hide and he's helping her hide it." He stepped closer. "Which is it?" "Neither." Daniel didn't blink. "You're reading a novel that isn't there, sir." "Am I?" Cross studied him a moment longer. Then he smiled again, colder than before. "You know, I've been trying to get Victoria out of that chair for 3 years. Her father built this company, but she runs it like it's a war, and half the board is tired of bleeding for her. All I need is one crack, one reason, one small piece of evidence that she isn't the invincible machine she pretends to be." He was at the door now. "If you ever decide you'd rather be my friend than her secret, Mr. Carter, my number's easy to find. And my friends retire very, very comfortably." He left. Daniel stood alone in the kitchen, the glass of water sweating in his hand, and understood for the first time exactly how dangerous his job actually was. He told Victoria that afternoon. He didn't soften it. He gave it to her straight, every word of it, the way he'd want it given to him. She listened without moving. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time, staring out the window at the city she'd bled to hold. "Roland Cross," she said finally, "has wanted my chair since the day my father put me in it instead of him. He believed the company should have passed to him. He was my father's oldest friend and my father's biggest mistake, and he is patient in a way that most predators aren't. He'll wait years for the right moment." She turned to look at Daniel. "And now he's noticed you." "He offered to make me rich," Daniel said. "To sell you out. I know he did. It's what I would have done in his position." She said it without judgment. "The question, Mr. Carter, is what you're going to do about it." Daniel actually laughed, short and disbelieving. "You think I'm going to take his money?" "I think," Victoria said slowly, "that I've spent my whole life being right about people, and the way I stay right is I never assume anyone is different. Everyone has a price. You have a daughter, and daughters are expensive, and Roland Cross has more money than God." She was watching him very carefully now, and Daniel understood that this was a test, maybe the biggest one she'd given him. "So tell me, what's your price?" And Daniel felt something go cold and hard in his chest. Not anger exactly, but close to it. The specific hurt of being measured by a person you'd started to think measured you differently. "You still don't get it," he said quietly. After all this, after the water, after the board meeting, after every single time I could have walked and didn't. He set down the glass he was still holding. You want to know my price, Victoria? Here it is. You already paid it. You gave my daughter her lungs back. There is no number Roland Cross can write on a check that competes with the sound of my little girl running up a flight of stairs and not stopping at the top to catch her breath. He can't buy me because you already gave me the only thing I ever wanted, and you gave it to me before you even knew if I'd say yes. He held her eyes. I'm not for sale. Not to him. Not to anybody. And the fact that you still had to ask. He stopped and shook his head. That's the saddest thing about you. You know that you genuinely believe everyone would sell you out for the right price, because everyone always has. Victoria Hale looked at him, and for a moment the mask didn't just slip. It fell all the way off. Yes, she said, barely a whisper. Everyone always has. And Daniel saw it, then saw the whole shape of her loneliness in a single word. Saw 11 years of a woman holding herself together in the dark, because she'd learned in the hardest way possible that the second she let anyone hold her up, they'd let her fall. Not me, he said. I don't care how long it takes you to believe it. Not me. She didn't answer. She couldn't. She just turned back to the window, and Daniel saw her shoulders were not quite steady, and he had the good sense to leave her alone with it. That night, his phone rang at 11:40. He was awake folding Lily's laundry, and he answered before the second ring. Yeah, Daniel. Just his first name. She'd never used just his first name before, and her voice was wrong, thin and strained in a way that put him on his feet instantly, laundry forgotten. I need you to come to the penthouse, now. I can't. A sharp intake of breath. I can't get up off the floor. Where's Grace? Where's your doctor? Grace doesn't know about the penthouse. Nobody does. Dr. Reyes is in Boston until Thursday. A pause, and when she spoke again, her voice broke on it just slightly, just enough. There's no one else, Daniel. There's no one else I can call. That's the entire point of you. Please. Please, Victoria Hale said. Please. I'm calling Mrs. Alvarez to sit with Lily, and I'm on my way, Daniel said, already grabbing his keys. Stay on the phone with me. You hear me? Don't hang up. Tell me exactly what happened. I fell. Her breathing was ragged. In the bathroom. My legs they went. I've been on the floor for 40 minutes trying to... A sound that might have been a sob quickly strangled. I can't get leverage. Everything I try makes it worse. Okay, listen to me. You're going to stop trying to get up. Do you hear me? Just stop. Lie still. You're not alone anymore. I'm coming, and the getting up is my job now, not yours. All you have to do is breathe and stay on this phone. Can you do that? There was a long, shaking pause. Yes, she whispered. Good. Now tell me the address. Daniel broke every speed limit between his apartment and the penthouse, and he talked to her the entire time, kept her voice in his ear, kept her tethered. He talked about Lily. He talked about the fish tank at the doctor's office and how Lily had named a fish Mr. Bubbles, and demanded they visit him at every appointment. He talked about nothing and everything, and he heard Victoria's breathing slow down, heard the panic drain out of it, degree by degree, because for the first time in 11 years, she was on a bathroom floor, and she was not alone. The doorman knew him now. He rode the private elevator up with his heart going like a hammer, and when he let himself into the penthouse with the code she'd given him, he found her exactly where she said she'd be, on the bathroom floor, her back against the tub, her face gray with pain and exhaustion. And she looked up at him, and something in her face at the sight of him was so naked and so relieved that Daniel had to swallow hard before he could speak. Hey, he said softly, crouching down beside her, the same way he had that first night in her office. There you are. I've got you now. I'm sorry, she said. And Victoria Hale, who had never apologized to anyone in the years Daniel had known of her, said it again. I'm sorry. I didn't want you to see me like this. I didn't want anyone to ever, Stop. He said it gently. There's no anyone here. There's just me. And I have seen my own daughter fight for every breath in her body, and I have cleaned the floors of 100 men richer than God. And I promise you, there is nothing about a person needing help that I have ever once thought was shameful. Not once in my life. He held out his hand palm up exactly like he had the first night. Now, same as before. You set the pace. Use my arm. We're gonna get you off this floor, and then I'm gonna make you a cup of tea, and you're gonna tell me the truth about how bad the last few nights have really been. Deal. She looked at his open hand. And this time she didn't hesitate, not the way she had that first night. This time, she took it right away. Getting her up took a long time. He was patient. He let her rest twice. He never once made her feel the weight of it. And when she finally sank onto the edge of the enormous bed, in a room bigger than Daniel's whole apartment, she was trembling with the exhaustion of it. But she was up. He made the tea. He found the kitchen after some searching in a penthouse so vast and so empty it made his chest ache because there was nothing in it. No photographs, no clutter, no evidence that a human life happened here. It looked like a hotel room for a guest who'd never quite arrived. He carried the tea back and set it on the nightstand and pulled a chair over and sat, and he didn't say anything, just let her come to it in her own time. 3 nights, she said finally. You asked how bad the last few nights have been. That's the answer. This is the 3rd night I haven't really slept. The cold, I told you. The hardware doesn't like the cold. She wrapped both hands around the warm mug. It's never been this bad before. Or maybe it has. Maybe I always had somewhere to be the next morning, some meeting, some fight, and it gave me a reason to get up off the floor. Tonight I didn't. I fell and I lay there and I realized there was nobody in the entire world who would notice if I never got up at all. Her voice was terribly steady. And that's when I called you. Daniel felt that one land somewhere deep. I'd notice, he said quietly. I know. She looked at him. That's the strange part. I've known you 6 weeks, and I called you before I even thought about it. My body was on the floor, and my hand was already dialing your number. Do you understand how much that terrifies me? Why would it terrify you? Because the last time I needed someone, Victoria said, the last time I let myself lean on a single human being, it was the man who was driving the car 11 years ago, my fiancé. He walked away from the accident without a scratch, and I spent 9 months in a hospital learning to walk again, and he came to visit 4 times before he stopped coming at all. She took a sip of the tea. He said he couldn't watch me be weak. He said it wasn't the woman he proposed to. And then he told 2 people at his firm about my spine, about the hardware, and inside a month it was all over the industry, and my own father's board started asking whether I was fit to inherit anything. Her hands tightened on the mug. So I learned that the moment you let someone hold you up, you hand them the map to exactly where you're weakest, and they will use it, every time. That's not cynicism, Mr. Carter. That's data. That's 11 years of data. Daniel sat with that for a long moment. Can I tell you something? He said. You will regardless. That got the ghost of a smile out of her, tired as it was. When my wife was dying, Daniel said. At the end, she couldn't do anything for herself. Nothing. I fed her. I carried her. I did all of it, every single thing, for the last 2 months of her life. He looked at his own hands. And you know what she said to me near the very end? She apologized. Just like you did tonight. She said she was sorry I had to see her like that. Sorry she was a burden. Sorry I was stuck taking care of a body that didn't work anymore. His voice went rough. And I got so angry at her. It's the only time I ever got angry at her, when she was sick. Because I said, Sarah, don't you dare apologize to me for letting me love you. Taking care of you isn't the price of loving you. It's the whole point. And she cried, and I cried. And it was the closest we ever were, right there at the end, when she finally stopped being ashamed of needing me. The penthouse was silent. I don't know who taught you that being weak means being betrayed, Daniel said. But he was wrong, Victoria. He was a coward, and he was wrong. and he cost you 11 years of ever letting a single soul near you. But he was wrong. He met her eyes. Taking care of somebody isn't the price of caring about them. It's the whole point. You just never had anybody stick around long enough to prove it. Victoria Hale looked at him, and her eyes were bright, and her jaw was working the way a person's does when they are fighting with everything they have not to cry in front of someone. And then, for the first time in 11 years, Victoria Hale stopped fighting it. She didn't sob. She wasn't the kind of woman who came apart in big pieces. But 2 tears spilled over and ran down her face, and she didn't wipe them away, didn't turn from him, just let this one man in the world see them. "I don't remember the last time I cried," she said, her voice barely there. "I told you that. On the phone. Weeks ago." "I remember. You made me a liar, Mr. Carter." She wiped her face now finally, and something in her expression was almost wondering. "Twice in one night I've done things I haven't done in over a decade. Ask for help. And cry." She let out a breath that shook. "I don't know what you are. I don't know what to do with you." "You don't have to do anything with me," Daniel said gently. "That's the whole thing you can't seem to believe. You don't owe me for tonight. You don't have to pay it back or guard against it or figure out my angle. I don't have an angle. I'm just a guy sitting in a chair making sure you're okay, because somewhere along the way, I started giving a damn whether you're okay." He stood, took the empty mug from her hands. "Now lie down. I'll be right out there on the couch. If you need anything in the night, you say my name, and I'll hear you. And in the morning, I'll be here, and we'll figure out the cold and the hardware, and how to make sure this never happens like this again. But tonight, you just sleep, and you let somebody else keep watch for once." She lay back against the pillows. She was asleep before he even reached the door. Daniel stood in the enormous, empty, echoing penthouse, and he looked at the sleeping woman who ran an empire and had no photographs on her walls, and he felt something shift inside his chest that he wasn't ready to name. He didn't sleep much on that couch. He kept getting up to check on her the way he checked on Lily standing in the doorway, watching the rise and fall of her breathing until he was sure it was steady. Somewhere around 4 in the morning, he stood there in the dark and admitted a thing to himself that he'd been circling for weeks. He'd stopped doing this for the salary a long time ago. He didn't know when it had happened. Maybe the hallway outside the board meeting when her eyes had found him. Maybe tonight on the phone when she'd whispered, "Please." But the money had stopped being the reason a while back, and now there was another reason, and it was a reason a man in his position had absolutely no business having about a woman who signed his checks and could destroy his life and lived in a world that would never not in 100 years make room for a widowed former janitor from a walk-up in Queens. He was in trouble. He knew it. He stood in the dark and knew it all the way down. And across the city, in an office lined with photographs of a company he still believed should have been his. Roland Cross sat awake at his desk looking at a photograph a private investigator had emailed him at midnight. A grainy, shot-long lens taken from a car across the street. Daniel Carter walking into the lobby of a residential tower at 11:58 p.m. A residential tower whose penthouse was owned through 3 shell companies by Victoria Hale. Roland Cross looked at that photograph for a long, long time. Then he smiled, and he picked up his phone, and he made a call. "It's me," he said. "Yes, I know what time it is. Listen, that janitor she hired, I want everything. His dead wife, his sick kid, the debt, all of it. And I want you to find me the moment. The one moment where the 2 of them are somewhere they shouldn't be doing something they can't explain." He leaned back in his chair. "Because I've watched Victoria Hale be untouchable for 11 years. And I do believe I've just found the one thing that finally makes her human." His smile widened in the dark. "And human, gentlemen, is very much killable." The morning after the fall, Daniel woke on the couch to the smell of coffee he hadn't made. He sat up fast, disoriented, and found Victoria standing at the kitchen island in a robe, both hands wrapped around a mug, watching him with an expression he couldn't read. "You're up," he said, scrambling to his feet. "You shouldn't be up. You should be— How did you even get out of bed?" "Bed." "Slowly," she said. "And carefully. and by myself because you were snoring loudly enough to wake the doorman 40 floors down." There was something almost gentle in the way she said it. "You stayed all night." "I told you I would. People tell me a lot of things." She took a sip of her coffee. "You're the first one in a very long time who actually did the thing they said." She set the mug down. "I made you coffee. I don't know how you take it. I don't know anything about you, do I?" "Not really. I know your file. I know your debt and your daughter's diagnosis and your dead wife's cause of death. But I don't know how you take your coffee." "Black," Daniel said. "2 sugars if I'm feeling fancy." "Are you feeling fancy?" "Ma'am, I slept on a couch that costs more than my car. I'm feeling downright luxurious." And Victoria Hale laughed. An actual laugh, short and surprised, like it had escaped before she could stop it, and she pressed her fingers to her lips like she wanted to catch it and put it back. Daniel just grinned at her. "There it is," he said. "There's what—" "You laughed, first time. I was starting to think you didn't know how. I don't usually." She handed him the coffee. Their fingers brushed on the mug, and they both pretended not to notice. "You should go. You've got a daughter to get to school, and I've got a 9 o'clock. And Daniel—" She stopped him at the door. "Last night, what I told you, about the accident, about him." She lifted her chin, and the vulnerability was already retreating behind the armor, but not all the way, not like before. "I've never told anyone that story. Not Grace. Not my father before he died. No one." "I know," Daniel said quietly. "So I need you to understand what it means that I told you." "I understand exactly what it means." He looked at her a moment longer. "It means you trusted me, and I'm not going to make you regret it. Ever." He left, and Victoria stood alone in her enormous kitchen, holding her coffee, and stared at the door for a long time after it closed. That was 7:15 in the morning. By 9:40, everything had started to go wrong, and neither of them knew it yet, because at 9:40 across the city, a private investigator named Frank Delgado was sitting in Roland Cross's office laying out photographs on the man's desk like a poker player showing a winning hand. "He walked in at 11:58 p.m., Delgado said. He didn't walk out until 7:20 the next morning. Overnight. 7 hours and change. He tapped the grainy image of Daniel entering the residential tower. "Now I checked the property records like you asked. Penthouse is owned by a shell called Meridian Trust. Meridian Trust is owned by a holding company in Delaware. That holding company files under a name I had to dig 3 levels deep to find." He slid the last document forward. "Victoria Hale. It's her building, Mr. Cross. Her private penthouse that nobody's supposed to know about, and her janitor spent the night in it." Roland Cross looked at the photographs for a long, satisfied moment. "You understand what this looks like," he said. "It looks like exactly what you want it to look like." "It looks," Cross said slowly, "like the untouchable Victoria Hale is having an affair with a member of her own cleaning staff, a widower she plucked off the night shift and installed in a made-up job with a salary that appears on no official record. It looks like she's compromised, reckless, emotionally unstable." He leaned back. "It looks like a woman who is not fit to run a publicly traded company." "You don't actually know that's what it is," Delgado said. "For all we know, he's a nurse, a caregiver of some kind. Frank." Cross smiled thinly. "I don't need it to be true. I need it to be a story. And a story about the Ice Queen and her secret janitor lover told to the right 4 board members over the right dinner does everything I need it to do. It doesn't matter what the truth is. By the time the truth comes out, if it ever does, she'll already be out of that chair and I'll be in it." He gathered the photographs. "Keep watching, both of them. I want to know when they're together where they go, everything. And Frank the kid, the sick daughter. Find me the leverage there too. A single father will do things to protect his child that he'd never do to protect himself." Delgado hesitated. "The kid's 7 years old, Mr. Cross. I'm aware of her age. There's a line is all I'm saying." "There's a line," Cross agreed pleasantly, and it's right where I decide it is. Do the job, or I'll find someone who will." Delgado did the job. Daniel had no idea. For 2 weeks, life got better than it had any right to be. Lily's checkup with Dr. Anand came back so clean, the doctor actually laughed out loud looking at the numbers. Victoria started letting him in on the small things, the human things. She told him she hated the taste of the anti-inflammatories she had to take, so he started keeping ginger candies in his pocket to give her after. She mentioned offhand that she hadn't been to a movie theater in 9 years because sitting still that long in a hard seat was agony. And the next week, Daniel figured out that the private screening room in the tower's basement had reclining seats, and he discovered it for her, and she watched a whole film for the first time in almost a decade, and didn't say thank you, but squeezed his forearm once in the dark hard and let go. They were building something. Neither of them called it anything, but it was there. And then on a Thursday afternoon, Roland Cross made his move. Daniel was in the executive suite when he heard the shouting. Not loud exactly, controlled, but sharp, the sound of powerful people fighting in a way they'd trained themselves never to fully lose control over. He came around the corner and found the door to the boardroom half open, and inside Victoria was standing at the head of the table facing down 6 board members, and Roland Cross was on his feet at the other end, and there was a folder open on the table between them. "The question isn't whether it's true, Victoria," Cross was saying. "The question is whether it's a liability. And a CEO who moves an unqualified member of her janitorial staff into a fabricated executive role, pays him off the books, and hosts him overnight in a private residence. She's gone to extraordinary lengths to keep hidden. That is a liability. That is exactly the kind of judgment that gets shareholders nervous." Daniel's blood turned to ice in the hallway. "Mr. Carter's role is executive support," Victoria said. Her voice was flat and cold and utterly controlled, and only Daniel, watching from the hall, could see the way her left hand was gripping the back of her chair. "His compensation is fully documented in a discretionary fund you control personally with no oversight." Cross cut in. "Come now, we're all adults here. A widower off the cleaning crew, a sick child whose sudden very expensive medical care coincides exactly with his hiring. Overnight visits to your secret penthouse." He spread his hands to the room, the picture of reluctant concern. "I take no pleasure in this. Victoria's father was my dearest friend. But if there's an inappropriate relationship compromising the judgment of this company's chief executive, this board has a fiduciary duty to—" "There is no relationship." Victoria's voice cracked like a whip. "Then explain the overnight visit." And there it was. The trap. Daniel watched it close around her from the hallway, and he understood the whole terrible shape of it in an instant. Because there was no explanation Victoria could give that didn't cost her everything. If she said nothing happened, "He's just my employee," it sounded like a lie and invited more digging. And if she told the truth, if she said he was there because I fell on my bathroom floor and couldn't get up, because my body is broken, because I needed help, then Roland Cross would have exactly what he'd been hunting for 11 years. Proof that she was weak. Proof that she was breakable. The one piece of leverage that would end her. Cross had built a trap with only 2 exits, and both of them were cliffs. And Daniel watched Victoria Hale realize it. He watched the calculation race behind her eyes, watched her understand that to save her company, she would have to expose the one secret that would lose it, and he watched her get ready to do it anyway. He watched her open her mouth to sacrifice the thing she'd protected for 11 years because it was the only move left on the board. She was about to tell them about her spine. Daniel didn't think. He walked in. "She was helping me," he said. Every head in the room turned. Victoria's eyes went wide. "Mr. Carter," Cross said, a slow smile spreading across his face. "How convenient. We were just discussing you." "Yeah, I heard." Daniel walked to the middle of the room, and he was terrified, more terrified than he'd been in years. But his voice was steady, because Lily had taught him how to keep his voice steady when everything inside him was falling apart. "You want to know why I was at that building overnight? I'll tell you. It's got nothing to do with any relationship, because there isn't one." He turned to face the whole board. "My daughter had a crisis. 7 years old, severe asthma. That night her breathing went bad, real bad, the kind of bad where you're counting minutes to the hospital. The lie came out clean and whole, and he could feel Victoria go still beside him. I panicked. I didn't have anybody. My sitter had gone home. And Ms. Hale had told me when she hired me that if I ever had an emergency with my kid, I could call her. So I did. And she sent a car, and she let me use an apartment close to the children's hospital so I'd have somewhere to be while things stabilized. That's the overnight visit, Mr. Cross. A scared father and a sick little girl. You've been building a scandal out of a medical emergency involving a child. The room was dead silent. That's a touching story, Cross said, but his smile had frozen. Can you prove it? Hospital records? A visit that night. My daughter's medical records are private, Daniel said. And I'll tell you right now, I will burn this whole thing to the ground before I let you drag a 7-year-old's asthma attack into your boardroom power play. You want to come after me? Fine, I'm nobody. But you go after my kid to get at Ms. Hale. And I promise you, sir, every reporter in this city is going to hear about the board member who tried to weaponize a child's medical emergency to steal a company. He let that land. How's that going to look in your press office? Cross's smile was completely gone now, and an older woman at the far end of the table, silver-haired, sharp-eyed, who Daniel would later learn was named Eleanor Voss, and had sat on the board longer than anyone, spoke for the first time. Roland, she said quietly, you brought us photographs of a man entering a building. That's what you brought us. A man entering a building. She folded her hands. And the explanation is a sick child and a boss who told him to call her in an emergency. I've raised 3 children with asthma myself. I've made that drive to the ER at 2 in the morning. Are we really sitting here suggesting Victoria should have refused to help? Eleanor, because if that's the standard, Eleanor went on, her voice hardening, if helping a terrified single father get his child to a hospital is now evidence of unfitness to lead, then I've been unfit my whole career, and so has every decent person who's ever sat at this table. She looked at Cross with open contempt. You've wanted her chair for 11 years, Roland. We all know it. But this dragging a child into it, this is beneath even you. 2 other board members were nodding now. Daniel watched the room turn, watched the thing Cross had built come apart in real time, and he understood that Eleanor Voss had just saved them both, and that she'd done it because Daniel had given her something clean to grab onto. A story a good person could stand behind. Cross knew it too. He gathered his folder, and his hands were not quite steady, and his voice when he spoke was very soft and very cold. This isn't over, he said. No. Victoria agreed. I don't imagine it is. The board filed out. Eleanor paused at the door, and she looked at Daniel with an expression he couldn't quite read, and she said, That was a good story, young man. Well told. And then quieter, so only he could hear, the best lies always have a true thing at the center of them. You should figure out what your true thing is before someone else does. And she left. Then it was just Daniel and Victoria in the empty boardroom. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. You lied to my board, Victoria said finally. Her voice was strange, shaking at the edges. You stood in front of 6 of the most powerful people in this company, and you lied to their faces to protect me. Yeah. You used your daughter. You dragged Lily into it. Do you have any idea what that could? If Cross digs into the hospital records and finds out there was no ER visit that night, there's no record because Cross can't legally get a 7-year-old's medical records without a court order, and no judge in the world signs that order for a corporate board dispute, Daniel said. I thought about it before I walked in. It holds. And even if it didn't, even if he found a hole in it, it doesn't matter. Because the second I made it about a sick kid and a good boss doing the right thing, I took your spine off the table. That's what he was about to make you do, Victoria. He was about to force you to choose between your company and your secret. I just gave you a third door, one where you don't have to give up either one. Victoria stared at him. And then, to Daniel's complete shock, her composure cracked, and she pressed the back of her hand to her mouth, and her eyes filled. "You didn't even hesitate," she said. "You just walked in. You threw yourself in front of that. For me." "Of course I did. Why would you?" Her voice broke. "You have a daughter. You have a life. Why would you risk all of that for a woman who threatened to destroy you the first night you met her, who investigated your entire life in 2 hours, who asked you to your face what your price was because I couldn't imagine a person who didn't have one?" Daniel took a step closer. And this was the moment he understood. This was the true thing at the center of it, the one Eleanor Voss had warned him to figure out before someone else did. And he already knew what it was. He'd known since 4 in the morning on that couch 2 weeks ago. "You want to know why?" he said quietly. "You really want the truth." Victoria went very still. "Because somewhere in the last 2 months, Daniel said, you stopped being the woman who signs my checks, and you stopped being the secret I keep, and you turned into—" He stopped and made himself say it. "You turned into somebody I can't stand to see get hurt. Somebody whose bad nights keep me awake in my own apartment across the city. Somebody I check on the way. I check on my own kid, because somewhere along the line, you're okay became one of the things I can't live without knowing." He held her eyes. "I know I'm not supposed to feel that. I know exactly what I am and exactly what you are, and exactly how far apart those two things sit. I've done the math 100 times, and it never comes out any way but stupid. But you asked me why, and I'm done lying to you. Even when the truth is inconvenient. Even when it's this." The boardroom was so quiet, Daniel could hear his own heartbeat. Victoria Hale looked at him with tears standing in her eyes, and something breaking open in her face that had been locked shut for 11 years. "Daniel," she whispered. "You don't have to say anything back," he said quickly. "I mean that. I didn't tell you so you'd— I'm not asking you for anything. You're my boss, and I know how it looks. A man in my position saying this to a woman in yours. Roland Cross would have a field day. So I'm not asking. I just wasn't going to stand in this room after what just happened and lie to you about the one thing that's actually true." He stepped back, giving her space, giving her the out. "That's all. That's the whole thing. Now you know." And Victoria Hale, who had spent 11 years building walls so high that no one could ever climb them, who had learned in the worst possible way that the moment you let someone in, they use the map to destroy you, looked at the man who had just thrown himself in front of a moving train to keep her standing, and she made a decision. She crossed the room, slowly, because slow was how her body moved, but she crossed it, and she stopped in front of him, close enough that he could see the tears on her lashes, and she reached up with one hand that trembled only slightly, and pressed her palm flat against his chest over his heart. "For 11 years, she said, her voice low and unsteady, "I have believed all the way to my bones that the second I let anyone see me weak, they would use it to destroy me. And then you saw me on the floor of my office on the very first night, at my absolute weakest, the most naked and broken I have ever been in front of another living soul." Her breath caught. "And you got me a bottle of water. And you left. And every single day since then, you've had 100 chances to use what you know, and every single time you've used it to protect me instead." A tear slipped down her cheek. "You are the disproof of the only lesson I ever really learned. Do you understand what that does to a person? You're proof that the thing I built my whole life around was wrong." "Victoria, I'm not finished." Her hand pressed harder against his chest. "I don't know how to do this. Whatever this is. I don't know how to trust someone without it feeling like handing them a knife. I've forgotten how, if I ever knew. I'm going to be difficult and cold, and I'm going to pull away every time I get scared, and I get scared constantly about everything all the time behind this face that everyone thinks is made of ice." Her voice dropped to almost nothing. "But you asked me once what my price was, and I've finally figured out my own answer." She looked up at him. "It's this. It's someone who sees me at my worst and stays. That's the price. That's the only thing I've ever wanted, and the one thing I stopped believing existed. and you've been paying it every day for 2 months without me even asking." Daniel covered her hand with his own. "Then stop asking what people's price is," he said softly, "and start asking who's already paying it." And Victoria Hale, the untouchable, the Ice Queen, the most feared, CEO in the city, closed her eyes and let her forehead drop against his chest, and Daniel wrapped his arms around her, careful of her back, careful of everything, and held her in the empty boardroom while 11 years of armor cracked all the way down the middle. Neither of them said anything for a long time. They didn't need to. But even in that moment, even with her heartbeat finally slowing against his own, Daniel felt a cold thread of worry work its way through the warmth, because he was thinking about Eleanor Voss's warning, about the true thing at the center of the lie, about the fact that Roland Cross had said this isn't over and had meant it, and he was right to worry, because at that exact moment, 40 floors down and half a city away, Frank Delgado, the investigator, was sitting in his car outside Lily's school, watching a 7-year-old girl in a yellow backpack run across the playground without stopping once for breath, and he was taking photographs, and he was thinking about the line he'd told Roland Cross not to cross, and he was crossing it anyway, because the check had already cleared. And when Delgado pulled the file on Daniel's late wife that afternoon, digging for anything usable, he found something that even Victoria's 2-hour investigation had missed. Something buried in a 4-year-old hospital billing record. Something about the debt, about how it had really started, about a decision Daniel had made in the last week of Sarah's life, that he had never told a single living soul. Delgado looked at it for a long moment. Then he circled it in red and he picked up his phone and he called Roland Cross. "I've got something," he said. "On the janitor. And Mr. Cross, this one's real. This one you don't even have to make up." He looked down at the circled line. "This one's going to break him in half." The thing Delgado found was this. In the last week of Sarah Carter's life, when the cancer had spread everywhere, and the doctors had stopped using the word treatment and started using the word comfort, there had been one final option. An experimental trial. A long shot. A Hail Mary. A drug that had worked for maybe one patient in 20 and cost more money than Daniel had ever seen in his life. Insurance wouldn't touch it. It was called compassionate use, and there was nothing compassionate about the price. Daniel had made a choice. He'd forged his father-in-law's signature on a loan. His own father-in-law, a man who'd never liked him, who'd told Sarah on her wedding day that she was marrying beneath herself. Daniel had taken out a loan in the old man's name to pay for a drug that might save his wife, and the drug hadn't worked, and Sarah had died anyway, and Daniel had been left with a debt he couldn't pay, and a crime he'd never confessed to. The father-in-law had found the loan a year later, and instead of pressing charges, he'd done something colder. He'd made Daniel sign a paper. A confession. A signed, notarized admission of forgery held over his head like a blade, on the condition that Daniel pay back every cent, or the old man would take it to the police, and take Lily too, because what judge gives custody to a convicted felon? That was the real reason for the $19,000 in debt. Not medical bills. A forged loan, a dead wife, and a signed confession sitting in a safe deposit box belonging to a man who hated him. And now, Frank Delgado had a copy of it. "You understand what this is," Delgado said, laying it on Roland Cross's desk. "Signed confession of forgery. Financial crime. He committed a felony, and the father-in-law's been sitting on it for 3 years, using it to squeeze him." He tapped the paper. "This is the leverage on the kid you wanted. You don't threaten the girl directly. You threaten the father with the one thing that takes the girl away from him. You make him choose between Victoria Hale and his own daughter." Roland Cross read the confession twice. "Where's the original? Safe deposit box. Father-in-law guy named Walter Prine out in Jersey. But a copy's plenty for what you need. You don't have to prosecute him. You just have to make him believe you will." Delgado sat back. "You put this in front of that janitor, Mr. Cross, and you tell him walk away from Victoria Hale. Give me what I need to take her chair, or I make one phone call and a felon loses custody of a 7-year-old with asthma." He shrugged. "No father on earth picks the boss over the kid. He'll fold. They always fold when it's the kid." Cross looked at the confession for a long, satisfied moment. "Set up a meeting. he said. "Somewhere quiet, just me and Mr. Carter." He smiled. "I'd like to watch his face." That was a Tuesday. The meeting happened on Wednesday at 4 p.m. in a hotel bar Daniel had never been to, chosen because it was the kind of place where powerful men had quiet conversations that never happened. Daniel almost didn't go. The text had come from an unknown number. "Roland Cross wants 10 minutes. Your daughter's future depends on you showing up. 4 p.m. Come alone. Tell no one, especially not Victoria." And Daniel had stood in his kitchen staring at it with his heart hammering, every instinct screaming that this was the thing he'd been dreading, the shoe he'd known would eventually drop. He thought about calling Victoria. He came very close. He didn't. Because the text said Lily's future depended on it, and when it came to Lily, Daniel didn't gamble. He went alone, and he told no one. That was his first mistake. Cross was already there when Daniel arrived, sitting in a corner booth with a glass of something amber he wasn't drinking and a leather folder on the table in front of him. He gestured to the seat across from him like a man welcoming an old friend. "Mr. Carter, thank you for coming. Sit, please. Can I get you something? I'll stand." "You'll want to sit for this." Cross's voice was pleasant, and that was the worst part, how pleasant it was. "Sit down, Daniel. I'm not your enemy. I'm about to become the most important friend you've ever had. Sit." Daniel sat. Cross opened the folder. He turned it around, slid it across the table, and Daniel looked down at his own signature at the bottom of a document he'd hoped no one would ever see again, and every drop of blood in his body went cold. "Walter Prine," Cross said gently, "sends his regards. Or rather, he doesn't know I have this yet, but he will if you make me tell him. Forgery, Daniel. A felony. You forged a loan in your father-in-law's name to pay for a cancer drug that didn't work." He shook his head with something that looked almost like sympathy and was infinitely worse. "I have to tell you, when my man brought me this, I actually felt for you. I did. A dying wife. A desperate husband. I understand desperation, but the law doesn't care about your reasons. And a judge deciding custody. A judge looks at a convicted felon with a forgery on his record and a 7-year-old daughter, and that judge does the math very quickly." Daniel couldn't speak. His mouth had gone completely dry. "Here's what's going to happen," Cross went on, closing the folder, sliding it back toward himself. "You're going to help me. Nothing dramatic. I want documentation of Victoria's condition, her medical situation, the hardware in her spine, the falls, all of it. You have access to Dr. Reyes's communications, to her private penthouse, to everything. I want proof on paper that she's physically unfit to run this company. You get me that, and this." He patted the folder. "Disappears. Walter Prine never gets a phone call. Your daughter keeps her father. You keep your freedom." He smiled. "You even keep the salary, honestly. I'm not an unreasonable man. Once I have Victoria's chair, I'll have every reason to keep you happy and quiet. And if I say no, then I call Walter Prine this afternoon and tell him exactly where you've been spending your nights and exactly how much you're being paid. And I suggest to him that a man doing that well can certainly afford to pay back what he stole immediately or face the consequences." Cross spread his hands. "Prine's been looking for a reason to take that little girl from you for years, Daniel. We both know it. I'd just be giving him the push, and you'd lose everything. Your daughter, your freedom, all of it. Over a woman who, let's be honest, will discard you the moment you're no longer useful to her. That's what people like Victoria do. It's what people like us do." Daniel stared at the man across the table. And here is what Roland Cross did not understand, because he had never in his life met a person like Daniel Carter, and so he had no way to account for one. "You know what the funny thing is?" Daniel said quietly. "Enlighten me. You spent all this money, hired investigators, dug up the worst thing I ever did, the thing I've been ashamed of for 3 years, the thing that wakes me up at night." Daniel's voice was steady, now steadier than it had any right to be. "And you think you've got me. You think you're holding the one card that breaks me." He looked Cross dead in the eye. "But you made one mistake, Mr. Cross. You assumed I'd rather protect myself than do the right thing. and every single person who's ever assumed that about me has been wrong. Cross's smile flickered. You're not thinking clearly, he said. This is your daughter. Don't. Daniel's voice came down like a hammer. Don't you say her name. Don't you put her name in your mouth in the same breath as this filth. He leaned forward. You want to know about my daughter, Mr. Cross? Let me tell you about my daughter. When she was 5 years old, she asked me why we didn't have as much as the other kids at her school. And I told her the truth. I said, baby, we don't have a lot of money, but we've got something a lot of rich people never get. We've got the kind of name you can say out loud in any room and never once feel ashamed of. I told my little girl that a good name is worth more than a good bank account. His eyes burned. And you're sitting here asking me to sell that. To betray a woman who trusted me to hand her broken body over to the wolves so you can steal what her father built, and to teach my daughter by doing it that when things get hard, Daddy sells people out to save his own skin. He shook his head slowly. You've got the wrong man. You dug up my worst mistake, and you don't even understand what it was. I broke the law once to try to save the woman I loved from dying. That's the worst thing I ever did, and I'd do it again because it came from love. But this, what you're asking, this comes from cowardice, and I would rather lose my freedom than let my daughter grow up watching me become a coward. The hotel bar was very quiet. You'd lose her, Cross said, and his voice had gone cold and flat, the pleasantness stripped away. You understand that you'd go to prison. Prine would get custody. That little girl would grow up without a father because you decided your principles mattered more than she does. And that was the blow that landed. Daniel felt it go in, felt the terror of it, the real and specific horror of Lily growing up in Walter Prine's cold house of Lily, being told her father was a criminal of Lily's face the day they took him away. His hands were shaking. He wasn't going to pretend otherwise, but he'd made his choice the second he understood what he was being asked to do. You'd better make your phone call then, Daniel said. His voice broke on it, but he said it. Because I'm not doing it. I'm not selling Victoria Hale to you for anything. Not for money, not for my freedom, not even... His throat closed. Not even for the thing you think will make me fold. If I have to lose my daughter to keep from becoming the kind of man who'd do what you're asking, then I'll lose my daughter, knowing she'll grow up and understand someday why her father did the hard thing instead of the easy one. That's the last gift I've got to give her. And you can't take it because it's the one thing you never had to begin with. He stood up. Make your call, Mr. Cross, Daniel said. I'll be waiting. And he walked out of the hotel bar on legs that barely held him, and he made it to his car, and he sat behind the wheel in the parking garage and shook, and then he did the only thing left to do. He drove to Walter Prine's house in New Jersey, because Daniel Carter had learned one thing in 36 years of being poor, and being poor again, the only way to take away someone's power over you is to stop being afraid of the thing they're holding. Cross's whole play depended on Daniel being terrified of that confession getting out. So Daniel was going to get out ahead of it. He was going to look Walter Prine in the eye and tell him everything before Cross could, and he was going to take his chances with the truth. It was 6:30 when he pulled into the driveway of the big cold house where Sarah had grown up. Walter Prine answered the door himself, an old man, now thinner than Daniel remembered, and his face when he saw who it was went hard and closed. You've got some nerve, Prine said. Yeah, Daniel said. I do. Can I come in? I need to tell you something, and I need to tell you before somebody else tells you a twisted version of it. 10 minutes, Walter. Then if you want to call the police, I'll sit right here and wait for them. Something in Daniel's face must have gotten through because Prine stepped back and let him in. Daniel told him everything. Not the sanitized version. All of it. The forged loan, yes, that Prine already knew. But the part he didn't know, the man named Roland Cross, the woman named Victoria Hale, the offer, the whole rotten deal. Daniel laid it all out on Walter Prine's kitchen table, the same table where he'd once eaten Thanksgiving dinner as a young man in love with the old man's daughter. He wants me to betray a woman who trusted me, Daniel finished. And he's using your confession to make me do it. So I came to tell you first, because you deserve to hear it from me. I forged your name, Walter. I stole from you. It was the worst thing I ever did, and I've been ashamed of it every day for 3 years. And I understand if you want to press charges. I do. I broke the law, and there should be a consequence for that, and I've made my peace with it. He put his hands flat on the table. But I couldn't do the thing Cross asked. I couldn't sell out a good person to save myself, not even to keep from losing Lily. And I needed you to know why before it all comes down. That's all. That's why I'm here. Walter Prine was silent for a long, long time. And then the old man did something Daniel never in 1,000 years expected. He got up. He walked to a drawer in the kitchen. He took out a piece of paper, and he came back, and he set it on the table in front of Daniel, and Daniel looked down and saw that it was the confession. The original. The one that was supposed to be in a safe deposit box. It was never in a bank, Prine said gruffly. I told you that so you'd take it seriously. It's been in that drawer for 3 years. He sat back down heavily. You want to know something, Daniel? I've hated you for a long time. I hated that Sarah married you. I hated that she chose a man with nothing over everything I wanted for her. And when I found that forged loan, I thought, there it is. There's the proof he's exactly the low kind of man I always knew he was. His voice grew rough. But I've watched you these 3 years. Watched you raise that little girl alone. Watched you work yourself half to death and never once come asking me for a dime, even though I'd have made you crawl for it. And I've wondered more than once if maybe I had it backward. If maybe my Sarah saw something in you that I was too proud and too stupid to see. He picked up the confession, and he tore it in half, and then in half again. You committed a crime to try to save my daughter's life. Walter Prine said, his eyes wet. My daughter. You'd have done anything to save her, just like I would have. And I've spent 3 years punishing you for loving her the same way I did. He let the pieces fall to the table. There's no confession, Daniel. There never was, as far as anybody's ever going to know. You go tell your Roland Cross that the only copy just became confetti, and the man whose name got forged doesn't wish to press any charges, and never did. He stood, and he put out his hand, an old man's hand, trembling slightly. You're a better man than I ever gave you credit for. Sarah knew it. It's about time I did too. Daniel stood, and he took the old man's hand, and then he did something that surprised them both. He pulled Walter Prine into an embrace, and the old man held on, and 2 men who had hated each other for years stood in a cold kitchen in New Jersey and grieved the same woman together for the first time. She'd be proud of you, Prine said gruffly into his shoulder. Both of you. Go on, go be with your girl. And Daniel. He pulled back, wiped his eyes, tried to sound stern and failed. Bring her to see me sometime. Her grandfather's been a fool long enough. Daniel drove home that night with the confetti of his own confession in his jacket pocket and Roland Cross's entire leverage reduced to nothing. He should have felt triumphant. He'd won. Cross had nothing now. The one card the man had been holding was torn to pieces on a kitchen table in Jersey. But something nagged at him the whole drive home, because Roland Cross was not a man who played one card. Cross had said this isn't over in that boardroom, and he'd meant it, and a man that patient, that thorough, did not stake everything on a single piece of leverage. Daniel's phone rang at 9:15 that night. It was Victoria. And the second he heard her voice, he knew. Daniel. She was trying to sound controlled and failing. I need you to come to the tower, right now. Cross called an emergency board session, tonight. He's moving for a vote of no confidence. He's going to try to remove me tonight before I can rally anyone. Her voice dropped. And Daniel, he told me on the phone just now, he told me he knows everything. About my spine, about the falls, about you being at the penthouse. He said he has documentation. A shaking breath. How does he have documentation? Who could have possibly? And Daniel understood in a single sickening rush what Cross's real play had been all along. The hotel meeting hadn't been about turning Daniel. Cross had never expected Daniel to fold. The meeting had been a distraction, a few hours to get Daniel out of the building, chasing the forgery to Jersey, while Cross made his real move somewhere else entirely. Victoria, Daniel said slowly, his blood running cold. Where's Dr. Reyes? Where's your medical file? The real one, the complete one, The one with everything in it. Silence on the line. Victoria, where is your medical file? Dr. Reyes keeps a copy. In his office. Encrypted secure, but... Her voice cracked. Oh God. Reyes. He's been my doctor for 11 years. He'd never... Money makes people do things you'd never believe, Daniel said grimly, already grabbing his keys, already running for the door. Cross didn't need me to betray you. He just needed me to think I was the only leak, so I wouldn't be watching the real one. He's had your whole file for days. He was in the stairwell now, taking the steps 2 at a time. How long until the vote? An hour, maybe less. Then listen to me, and listen good, because we've got 1 hour to save everything. Daniel hit the street running. You're not going to hide anymore, Victoria? That's the trap. That's always been the trap. As long as your spine is a secret, it's a weapon he can hold over you. So we're going to do the one thing he'll never see coming. He yanked open his car door. We're going to walk into that boardroom and you're going to tell them the truth, all of it, before he can. You're going to take the weapon out of his hands by putting it on the table yourself. He started the engine. I'm on my way. Don't you dare go in that room without me. We walk in together, or not at all. He hung up and he drove into the night toward the tower, where 11 years of secrets were about to come crashing down, and he prayed to a God he wasn't sure he believed in. That 1 hour would be enough. Daniel made it to the tower in 19 minutes, and Victoria was waiting for him in the lobby, standing perfectly straight in a way that cost her, and the moment she saw him, something in her face broke loose with relief. They're gathering upstairs, she said. Cross has already got them talking. Eleanor called me 2 minutes ago. He's telling them he has proof I've been hiding a debilitating medical condition for years. That I've deceived the board, the shareholders, everyone. Her voice was tight. It's working, Daniel. Even the ones who defended me last time, because this time he's not making it up. Good, Daniel said. She stared at him. Good, because he can't destroy a secret you've already told. Daniel took both her hands. They were freezing. Listen to me. We've got about 8 minutes before you walk into that room, so I need you to hear every word. Cross's entire power over you for 11 years has been one thing. The threat of exposure. As long as your spine is a secret, he owns it. He decides when and how the world finds out, and that means he owns you. He squeezed her hands. So we take that away. Tonight. You walk in there and you tell them yourself. Before he can. You look every one of those people in the eye, and you say yes. I have a spinal condition from an accident 11 years ago, and here is how it has affected my performance running this company for the last decade. Which is to say not at all, because the numbers are right there and they don't lie. They'll say I deceived them. Then let them say it, and you answer it. Daniel's voice was fierce and certain. You say I didn't tell you because I watched what happened to my own reputation the last time someone knew, and I made a decision to let my work speak instead of my diagnosis. And then you ask them one question. He looked her dead in the eye. You ask them in 11 years, has my body ever once failed this company? Has a single deal fallen through a single quarter, come in short? A single promise gone unkept because of my spine? And the answer is no. It's no, Victoria. You've run this company better broken than Roland Cross could run it whole, so make them say it out loud. Victoria was breathing hard. And if it doesn't work, if they vote me out anyway, then they vote you out, and you walk out of that building with your head up and your dignity intact, and you build something new, and I'll be standing right next to you when you do. Daniel didn't blink. But you will not spend one more day of your life letting a man like Roland Cross hold your own body over your head like a loaded gun. That ends tonight. One way or the other, it ends tonight, and you're the one who ends it, not him. You. For a moment, Victoria just looked at him. And then slowly something changed in her face. The fear didn't leave exactly, but it was joined by something else. Something Daniel had been watching grow in her for 2 months. Something Roland Cross had never once accounted for. Resolve. You know, she said quietly, 11 years ago I decided I would never let anyone see me weak, because I believed weakness was the end of everything. She straightened, and this time it didn't look like it cost her. You've spent 2 months proving me wrong about that. So let's go prove it to a room full of people who've never once had the courage to be weak in front of anybody." They walked to the elevator together. And when the doors opened on the 50th floor, they walked into that boardroom side by side. The room went silent when they entered. 6 board members around the long table, and Roland Cross standing at the head of it with a folder open in front of him, and a look of triumph on his face that curdled the instant he saw Daniel walk in beside her. "Carter," Cross said, "you're not a member of this board. This is a closed session." "He stays," Victoria said. And she walked to the head of the table to her own chair, but she didn't sit. She stood behind it, both hands resting on its back, and she looked out at the room. "Sit down, Roland. You've been standing at the head of my table long enough." "Victoria, I don't think you understand the position you're in." "I understand it perfectly." Her voice cut clean through his. "You've called this session to remove me. You've told these people you have proof of a medical condition I've concealed. You're planning to reveal it dramatically to expose me to prove I'm unfit." She tilted her head. "Does that about cover it?" Cross's mouth tightened. "You could put it that way. Then, let me save you the trouble." Victoria Hale took a breath, and she looked at each member of the board in turn, Eleanor Voss and the others meeting every eye. 11 years ago, I was in a car accident. Not the minor incident in my official biography. A catastrophic one. My spine was shattered in 3 places. I spent 9 months in a hospital, learning to walk again, and I came out of it with surgical hardware holding my body together and a chronic condition that gives me significant pain, particularly in cold weather. On my worst days, my legs fail me. I have fallen. I have needed help getting up off the floor. She said it clearly without a tremor into a room full of people who could end her. I have concealed this from this board, from our shareholders, and from the public for 11 years. There. Now you all know. Roland, you can close your folder. I've just done your job for you." The room was in absolute shock. Daniel watched 6 powerful faces struggle to process a woman handing over freely the very weapon that had been assembled to destroy her. Cross recovered first, and his voice was ugly now. "So you admit it. You admit you've deceived this board for over a decade. You admit you're physically compromised. I'd say that settles the question of your fitness rather conclusively." "I admit no such thing," Victoria's voice snapped like a whip. "I admit I have a medical condition. I do not admit it has ever once compromised my ability to run this company. And that Roland is the only question that actually matters, so let's answer it. Right here. In front of everyone." She turned to the board. "I've run Hale and Cross Holdings for 11 years. In that time, revenue has tripled. We have gone from a struggling holding company on the edge of insolvency, the company my father nearly ran into the ground, to one of the strongest firms in our sector. Every quarter, every year, through all of it, with this spine." She leaned forward. "So I'll ask you the question Roland doesn't want asked. In 11 years, has my condition ever once cost this company a single dollar, a single deal, a single quarter? Has my body ever, one time, failed the people in this room?" Silence. "Eleanor," Victoria said, "you've been on this board the entire time. Answer me honestly. Has it?" Eleanor Voss looked at Victoria for a long moment, and then the old woman set down her pen. "No," she said. "It hasn't. Not once." She turned to look at Roland Cross. "In fact, if I'm being honest, Victoria's worst quarter is still better than the best quarter you ever posted when you ran the Western Division, Roland, which is perhaps why you've spent 11 years trying to take her chair instead of earning your own." A ripple went through the room. "This is absurd," Cross snapped. "The issue is deception, not performance. She lied to us. She hid a debilitating condition. What else is she hiding? How can this board trust anything she says?" And that was when Daniel stepped forward. "Can I say something?" he asked. Every head turned. "I know I'm not on the board. I know I'm the janitor Mr. Cross keeps bringing up like it's an insult. And he's right, that's what I was. 2 months ago, I was cleaning these floors at night for $14 an hour." He let that sit. So I think I might be the only person in this room who can tell you what I'm about to tell you because I'm the only one who's seen both sides of it. Cross moved to cut him off. This is highly irregular. Let him speak, Roland. It was Eleanor. God knows we've listened to you long enough. Daniel nodded to her and turned back to the room. Mr. Cross wants you to believe that a person who hides their pain is a person who can't be trusted. I want to tell you why that's exactly backward. He looked at Victoria, then back at the board. The night I found out about Ms. Hale's condition, it was an accident. I walked into her office by mistake, and I saw her at her absolute worst on the floor, unable to get up. And do you know what she did? She didn't ask for my help. She didn't fall apart. She looked me dead in the eye and she ordered me out, because even flat on the ground in agony, her first instinct was to protect this company from exactly the moment you're all sitting in right now. His voice grew stronger. For 11 years, this woman got up off the floor every single morning that her body told her to stay down, put on a suit, and came in here and outworked every able-bodied person in this building and never let one of you carry an ounce of it. You want to call that deception? I call it the single most impressive display of strength I have ever seen in my life. And I've seen a lot of strong people. I watched my wife fight cancer for 2 years. I know what strength looks like. It looks like her. He pointed at Victoria. It looks like a person who hurts every single day and never once lets it become your problem. The room was dead silent. Roland Cross wants her chair. Daniel went on quieter now. He's wanted it for 11 years, and he couldn't beat her on the numbers because nobody can, so he went looking for the one thing that had nothing to do with her ability to lead. He went looking for her wounds. He hired investigators. He dug into her private medical records. He bribed her own doctor, a man who took an oath to hand over 11 years of confidential files. Daniel watched several board members' faces change. Ask him how he got that folder in front of him. Ask him if a man who would bribe a physician to break confidentiality and steal a patient's medical records is the man you want holding the top job at this company. Because I'll tell you what that tells me about Roland Cross. It tells me there is nothing and no one he won't betray to get what he wants. Daniel's voice dropped. He tried to make me betray her too. 2 days ago. He found the worst mistake of my life, and he tried to use it to make me hand her over to him. And I want you all to hear what I told him. He looked Cross dead in the eye. I told him I'd rather lose everything I have than become a man who sells out someone who trusts me. Because a good name is the only thing you can't buy back once you've spent it. He turned back to the board. So that's your choice tonight. That's really all this is. You can have a leader who hides her pain so she can carry yours. Or you can have a man who hunts for other people's pain so he can use it. That's Victoria Hale and that's Roland Cross. Now you decide which one runs this company. For a long moment nobody moved. Then Eleanor Voss stood up. I've heard enough, she said. Roland, I move that we table the vote of no confidence in Victoria Hale, permanently. She turned to face him. And I move that this board open an immediate investigation into how you obtained privileged medical records, because if what this young man says is true, you haven't just committed an ethics violation. You've likely committed a crime. And I, for one, would like to know whether the man who's spent 11 years lecturing us about fitness to lead is fit to remain on this board at all. Seconded, said a man 3 seats down. Seconded, said another. Roland Cross looked around the table, and for the first time, Daniel watched the confidence drain out of the man's face, watched him understand that the story had gotten away from him, that the weapon he'd spent months building had been turned in his own hand. You're making a mistake, Cross said, but his voice had lost its power. All of you. She's compromised. She's weak. You're choosing sentiment over... We're choosing the person who tripled our revenue over the person who bribed a doctor, Eleanor said flatly. Sit down, Roland. Or better yet, don't. Because I suspect that by the time our attorneys finish looking into how you got those records, you won't have a seat at this table to sit in. And that was the moment Roland Cross lost. Daniel saw it happen, saw 11 years of patient scheming collapse in the space of a single board meeting, undone not by a better scheme, but by the one thing Cross had never understood and never possessed: the loyalty of a person who couldn't be bought. Cross gathered his folder with shaking hands. He looked at Victoria, and his mouth twisted. "This isn't—" "If you say this isn't over one more time," Victoria said, "I'm going to have you removed from this building by the same security guards who used to escort my janitor upstairs. Get out, Roland. You've been trying to take my father's chair since the day he chose me over you. And you never understood why he did it." She stood tall behind that chair. "He chose me because when things got hard, I got up. And when things got hard for you, you went looking for someone to blame. That's the difference. That was always the difference. Now get out of my boardroom." Roland Cross walked out, and he did not say another word. The investigation that followed took 3 months. It found everything. The bribe to Dr. Reyes wired through the same shell companies Cross had used to hide it. The investigator Frank Delgado, who faced with charges of his own, turned on Cross completely and handed over every document, every recording, every instruction. Roland Cross was removed from the board, stripped of his shares under the ethics clause his own father had written into the company charter decades before. And by the time the criminal case for the medical records theft was through with him, the man who had spent 11 years hunting Victoria Hale's weakness had lost his seat, his fortune, and his name. He ended up with exactly what he'd tried to leave Daniel with. Nothing, but that was later. That night, after the boardroom emptied, after Eleanor Voss gripped Daniel's arm on her way out and said, "You'd have made a hell of a lawyer, young man, and I mean that." After the last of them had gone, Victoria Hale finally sat down in her chair. She sat down slowly, and she let out a breath that seemed to carry 11 years in it, and she looked up at Daniel standing there in the empty room. "You did it," she said. "You did it," Daniel corrected. "You walked in there and put your own secret on the table. That took more courage than anything I've ever seen. I just talked." "You just talked," Victoria repeated softly. She shook her head. "Daniel, you stood in front of the 6 most powerful people in this company, and you called me the strongest person you've ever met. You compared me to your dying wife. You told a room full of sharks that hiding pain so you can carry other people's is a kind of strength." Her eyes were wet. "Do you have any idea what it did to me to hear someone say that out loud? After 11 years of being certain that if anyone ever found out, they'd only see weakness." Her voice broke. "You didn't just save my company tonight. You gave me back something I lost in a car 11 years ago. You gave me back the idea that a person can see all of me and not run." Daniel crossed the room and knelt down beside her chair so they were eye to eye. "I'm never going to run," he said. "I need you to hear me say that plain, so there's no confusion about it ever again. I have seen you at your absolute worst. On the floor of this office, on the floor of that bathroom, falling apart on the phone at midnight. I have seen every single thing you were afraid to show anybody. And I'm still here. I'm not here because I don't know how bad it gets. I'm here because I do, and it doesn't change one thing about how I feel." He took her hand. "You spent 11 years believing that being weak meant being left. I'm going to spend as long as you'll let me proving you wrong. Every day. Starting tonight." Victoria Hale looked at the man kneeling beside her chair. The widow janitor she'd found cleaning her floor. The one person in the world who'd held her secret and used it only to protect her. And she leaned down and she kissed him. It was a long time coming. 2 months of it, or 11 years of it, depending on how you counted. And when they finally broke apart, Victoria pressed her forehead to his, the same way she had that night in the penthouse, except everything was different now. Everything. "I don't know how to do this," she whispered. "I told you that already. I'm going to be difficult. I know. I'm going to pull away when I get scared. I know that too, and I'm going to need you to be patient with me in a way that isn't fair to ask of anyone." "Victoria," Daniel smiled. "I have a 7-year-old. I'm a professional at loving people who are difficult, who pull away when they're scared, and who need more patience than is fair. It's the only thing I'm actually good at." He cupped her face. You're not asking me for anything I don't already know how to give." She laughed then, that same surprised laugh from the kitchen weeks ago, except this time she didn't try to catch it and put it back. She let it out. She let herself have it. "There's a little girl," Victoria said, "who I would very much like to meet. If that would be all right. Lily's going to love you." Daniel's throat tightened. "You want to know something? She already asks about you. I mention you sometimes, the boss who fixed her lungs, and last week she drew you a picture. A stick figure in a suit. She wrote, 'The nice lady who helped me breathe' on the bottom. It's on our refrigerator right now." And Victoria Hale, who ran an empire who had faced down 6 board members without flinching an hour before, put her face in her hands and wept. Not from pain this time. From the almost unbearable weight of being wanted by a child she'd never met, of being drawn as the nice lady, of discovering at 41 years old that there was a refrigerator in Queens with her picture on it. "Hey," Daniel said gently, pulling her hands away from her face. "Hey, what's this?" "Nobody draws me," she managed. "Do you understand? In my whole life, no child has ever drawn me. I'm the woman people are afraid of. I'm the Ice Queen. And there's a little girl who's never met me, who drew me as the nice lady who helped her breathe." She wiped her eyes, laughing and crying at once. "How am I supposed to survive that, Daniel? How is anyone supposed to survive being loved that easily, after a lifetime of earning every scrap of it?" "You don't survive it," Daniel said softly. "You just let it happen. That's the whole trick. You just let it happen, and you stop bracing for the moment it gets taken away." He stood, and he pulled her gently to her feet, and he held her. "Nobody's taking it away. Not this time. Not us." The weeks after that were a different kind of story. A quieter one. The kind that doesn't make headlines, which was fine, because Victoria Hale had spent enough of her life making headlines. Lily met Victoria on a Saturday, and it went exactly the way Daniel knew it would, which is to say, Lily marched right up to the most feared CEO in the city, looked her up and down, and announced, "You're the lady from my picture. You look different in real life. You're prettier and you look sad. Why are you sad?" And Victoria Hale, who could freeze a boardroom with a glance, got down on one knee in front of a 7-year-old and said, "I think I've been sad for a very long time, and I'm just starting to not be. Would you like to help me practice?" And Lily considered this with tremendous seriousness and said, "Okay, but you have to meet Mr. Bubbles first. He's my favorite fish, and he's very shy, so you have to be gentle." And that was that. Victoria Hale was from that afternoon forward thoroughly and permanently claimed. Victoria's condition didn't disappear. That's not how it works, and this isn't that kind of story. There were still bad nights. Still cold mornings when her body refused her. Still falls, though fewer, because now there was someone there to catch her, and someone there meant she stopped taking the risks she'd taken for 11 years out of sheer grim isolation. But the difference was, this she stopped hiding. She told the board about her condition officially, on her own terms, and they wrote accommodations into her contract that she'd been too afraid to ask for her whole career, and her performance, which had been extraordinary while she was hiding, got even better once she stopped spending half her energy on the hiding. It turns out you can run a company much better when you aren't also running from yourself. Daniel never went back to cleaning floors. But he never quite became a corporate creature either. He kept the honesty that had made Victoria trust him in the first place, kept saying the true thing in rooms full of people who'd forgotten how, and Victoria came to rely on it more than any strategy or spreadsheet. Eleanor Voss took a liking to him and started slipping him books on business law. And 18 months later, Daniel Carter, former night janitor, sat for a paralegal certification and passed it because a man who could talk a hostile board into changing its mind in 10 minutes had a gift that shouldn't be wasted on logistics. And Walter Prine came to Sunday dinners. The old man who'd hated Daniel for years became, in his gruff and awkward way, the grandfather Lily had never had, and he'd sit at the table and watch his dead daughter's husband, and the woman that husband loved, and the granddaughter breathing easy and free, and sometimes Daniel would catch the old man just looking at all of it with wet eyes, a man who'd almost thrown away the only family he had left over pride, and had been given it back anyway. There's a moment Daniel comes back to when he thinks about how all of it happened. It's a Sunday afternoon, about a year after that night in the boardroom. He's driving through the city with Lily in the back seat, singing along to the radio at the top of her lungs. No cough, no wheeze, no fear. Just a little girl being loud because she can. And Victoria is in the passenger seat beside him, and she's got her hand resting on his where it sits on the gear shift, and she's watching Lily in the rearview mirror with an expression Daniel never saw on her face the whole time she was hiding, an expression of a person who has stopped bracing for the thing to be taken away. And Daniel remembers being the man in the freight elevator, the one who counted money he didn't have with his forehead against cold steel. The one who was told to make himself invisible because people up there could end him with a phone call. He remembers being so afraid all the time of everything, of one missed paycheck, of one bad night, of losing the only thing he had left in the world. And he thinks about how the whole thing turned on a single choice. A door that was open a few inches. A sound a woman made trying not to scare anybody. And a decision made in half a second to walk in instead of walking away. He could have walked away. That's the thing he understands now. The thing he'll tell Lily when she's old enough. The whole world tells you to walk away. The whole world tells you to keep your head down and make yourself invisible and protect your own skin, because caring about a stranger's pain is dangerous, because getting involved costs you, because the safe thing and the right thing so rarely turn out to be the same thing. He walked in anyway, and it changed both their lives forever. Not because it made everything easy, because it didn't. Not because the money fixed everything, though it fixed a great deal. It changed their lives because two people who had spent years surviving alone, a broken father counting doses, and a broken CEO getting up off the floor by herself every morning, discovered the one thing neither of them had believed was still available to them. They discovered they didn't have to do it alone. Victoria Hale stopped being the woman who was certain that everyone had a price, because she finally met the one person who didn't, and loving him taught her to see the others she'd been blind to. Daniel Carter stopped being the man who believed he was only ever one bad night away from losing everything, because he learned that some things, once they're truly yours, can't be taken by any phone call from anyone. And Lily Carter, who was supposed to spend her childhood being careful, spent it instead being loud and fast and free, running up flights of stairs, and never once stopping at the top to catch her breath, raised by a father who'd taught her that a good name is worth more than a fortune, and by a woman who'd learned late, but not too late, that being loved is not a weakness to be hidden, but a strength to be lived in the open. That's the whole story. A janitor saw something he was never meant to see, and instead of using it, he protected it. And in protecting one broken stranger, he built the family that saved them all. Some people spend their whole lives waiting for the world to become easier before they'll let themselves be happy. Daniel Carter and Victoria Hale stopped waiting. They stopped surviving alone, and they started living, and they never once looked back.